In the endless sprawl of the hive city, beneath towers that vanished into the smog of eternity, the air itself was thick with decay and devotion. Vox speakers screamed the litanies of the ecclesiarchy, hymns of sacrifice and blind faith that echoed through the metallic arteries of the city. Every man, woman, and half-starved child knew that to live was to serve, and to die was to offer oneself to the golden throne. But for the nameless laborer who now stood in the shadow of the cathedral gates, this devotion had taken a crueler shape. His name was forgotten long before the priests called him the Chosen. He had been one of billions, an anonymous soul working the corpse harvest pits beneath the manufactorums. For years he had hauled the dead of the Imperium, soldiers broken by war, citizens consumed by disease, and the unworthy burned by the purges of faith. He'd believed that his duty, grim as it was, kept him safe from the eyes of the ecclesiarchy. But faith in the Imperium was never blind. It hunted. It began with a visitation. The high priest came down from the golden spires, flanked by cherub servitors, whose faces were the remnants of infants grafted onto brass wings. They hovered in clouds of incense, their hollow eyes glowing red. "The Emperor sees your labor," the priest had declared, his voice trembling with divine ecstasy, "and he has chosen you to feed his eternal flame." The workers fell to their knees. None dared question it. To be chosen was an honor, even if it meant death, for in the Imperium, death in his name was the only true life. He was taken from the pits, stripped of his rags, and given a robe of grey purity. For 3 days he was fed nothing but sacred water, mixed with the blood of martyrs. The priests carved holy runes into his flesh, marks said to ward off the touch of the warp. Each incision burned with chemical fire, but he bore it in silence. Pain was prayer, the priest said. Agony was proof of devotion. On the eve of his sacrifice, he was led through the Hall of Martyrs, a cathedral of bones, where skulls of the faithful lined every wall. Candles burned in hollow sockets, dripping wax onto altars made from femurs. The chanting of the sisters rose like thunder, each verse praising the Emperor's light. And yet, as he gazed upon the mountains of skulls, a sliver of terror pierced his faith. Were these truly the blessed? Or were they all like him, terrified souls consumed to fuel a god that no longer heard them? The priests never stopped smiling. They called him sanctified fuel, a title that chilled him more than the cold air of the tombs. "I will be carried to Terra," one priest whispered. "Your soul will burn for him directly." He could not comprehend it. Terra was a myth to the hiveborn, a word spoken only in sermons. The world of the Emperor, where the golden throne devoured the souls of the sacrificed to keep the master of mankind alive. As he was loaded into the pilgrim vessel, chained among hundreds of other chosen, he looked out the narrow viewport. The stars beyond shimmered like 1,000 eyes watching him. Somewhere in that cosmic silence the warp waited, hungry, whispering. He prayed that his faith would be strong enough to keep him from its gaze. When the engines roared and the stars stretched into impossible shapes, he realized too late that the warp was not just outside. It was inside. Inside the chanting priests, inside the machine spirits, inside himself. And somewhere in that madness he heard a voice, not divine, not human, a voice that whispered, "He does not see you." The pilgrim ship Sanctitas Vitae drifted like a coffin through the ink of the void. Its metal hull was older than any of its passengers, scarred from wars no one remembered. Thousands of chanting voices filled its corridors, echoing through the shrines built into its bulkheads. The sound was meant to calm the machine spirits, to keep the warp from noticing them. But in truth, it only made the silence that followed seem more dreadful. The man who had been called the Chosen sat in the penitent hold with hundreds of others. They were wrapped in grey cloth, marked with burned symbols, their faces hollow from fasting. Only the dim crimson glow of lumen lamps illuminated their eyes, which flickered like dying embers. He tried to pray, but the words no longer felt right on his tongue. The warp's hum pressed against his skull, low and patient, like a living heartbeat beneath the ship's metal. Each hour, the ship's speakers crackled to life, broadcasting sermons recorded by the priests. Their voices trembled with zeal. "Rejoice, for your souls will be consumed by his glory. The Emperor devours that which is pure, and in your death mankind will endure." The others whispered the responses automatically. They were taught that the more they chanted, the safer they were. But the man noticed something else. The louder the voices became, the more the walls seemed to shiver. The ship groaned like a dying beast. The very air began to smell wrong, metal and blood and something older than both. 3 days into the voyage, the first pilgrim died. No one saw it happen. They found her in the corner, her robe stiff with dried crimson, her face twisted in a silent scream. The priest said she had been taken early, a blessing. They burned her body in the sanctum furnace. Her ashes vented into the void. But later, when the lights dimmed, some swore they heard her voice in the ventilation ducts, still whispering prayers. The priests told them never to listen. Time lost its meaning in the warp. The ship floated through a storm of colors that defied description, flashes of gold and violet and impossible blue, as if the stars themselves were bleeding. The hull shuddered under invisible pressure. The chosen man clung to the faith that the Emperor watched over them, but each hour that passed, the whisper inside his skull grew louder. It spoke in his own voice now. It mocked his prayers, twisted his memories, and reminded him that the Emperor's gaze could not possibly stretch across this madness. Then came the chanting. Not from the pilgrim, from the ship itself. The pipes vibrated with a tone too deep for human throats. The walls rippled like flesh. And from the sealed air vents, dark liquid began to leak, black and viscous, glowing faintly in the dim light. It smelled of rot and incense. The high priest declared it a miracle. "The Emperor's blood," he cried, lifting his hands toward the leaking ceiling. "He anoints his chosen." The pilgrims fell to their knees, smearing the substance onto their faces, their wounds, their tongues. "But the man," he hesitated. The whisper in his skull grew sharp, almost urgent. "Do not drink." Those who did began to convulse. Their veins turned dark. Some screamed praises. Others laughed until their throats tore open. By the time the priest realized something was wrong, it was too late. The blessed were mutating, their eyes melting into tar, their limbs twisting into impossible angles. The ship's lumen lights exploded one by one, leaving only the emergency red glow. In the chaos, the man broke from the crowd and ran. He stumbled through the labyrinthine corridors of the pilgrim decks, past broken shrines and corpses, nailed to the walls. Every door he opened led to another hall of madness, pilgrims clawing their faces, priests speaking in reversed tongues, machine servitors praying to nothing. The warp was bleeding into reality. He reached the observation chapel, a vast dome of cracked glass where pilgrims once gazed upon the Emperor's stars. Now there was only the warp, a boiling sea of light and shadow, shifting faces pressing against the barrier, laughing in silence. He dropped to his knees, hands over his ears, but the laughter wasn't coming from the void. It was coming from inside him, and then he saw it, a shadow moving through the warp, vast and luminous, crowned in thorns of flame. For a heartbeat, he believed it to be the Emperor. But as it drew closer, he realized it wasn't light radiating from it. It was infection. Its body was swollen, its eyes endless pits of rot and joy. Flies of starlight swarmed around its form, and its mouth split open into 1,000 smiling faces. Nurgle, the name burned into his mind like a brand. The god of decay, the master of corruption. The one who thrived on life turned to ruin. He stumbled backward, gasping for breath, whispering the Emperor's name. "Protect me, protect me, protect me." But no answer came. Only the sound of laughter, warm, fatherly laughter that filled the warp and his soul. When he woke, he was back in the pilgrim hold. The lights were steady, the priests calm. The high priest stood above him, his face serene. "You were touched by the warp," he said, "but do not fear. The Emperor has saved you." Yet the man could still hear the laughter. It hid beneath the prayers, beneath the breathing of the others. He looked at the priest's face and saw, just for a moment, maggots crawling in his eyes. And he knew with a horror deeper than madness that they had not left the warp. They had brought it with them. The ship Sanctitas Vitae drifted on through the warp, but the air inside had changed. It no longer smelled of oil and incense. It smelled of wet earth, old blood, and something sweet, like fruit left too long in the sun. No one spoke of the dead anymore. The priests had declared them ascended. Their bodies were sealed behind metal bulkheads, and every day the living offered prayers before those doors. Believing the souls within now whispered to the Emperor. But the chosen man, once a farmer from a forgotten planet, began to see what others refused to. The walls of the ship pulsed faintly, like veins under translucent flesh. The prayers didn't echo. they breathed. And sometimes the metal itself seemed to sigh, releasing warm, damp air that carried faint laughter. He tried to tell the others. "They're lying," he whispered to a pilgrim beside him, a gaunt woman whose lips were cracked from fasting. "The ship's dying." "We all are." But she smiled in a slow, dreamy smile and turned her head. Her neck made a wet, snapping sound as she moved, and a dark green liquid ran down her collar. "It's not death," she said softly. "It's his touch." By the next day, the sickness had spread. Skin broke out in lesions that glowed faintly under the lumen lights. Some pilgrims began to hum even when asleep, their mouths twitching with half-formed hymns. The priests called it the Emperor's Renewal. They held ceremonies where they kissed the infected sores of the faithful, believing it would grant them divine protection. The chosen man refused. He hid in the lower decks, away from the shrines, away from the chanting. But even there the ship changed. Fungal growths bloomed along the walls, green, gold and purple feeding off the recycled air. The pipes dripped black ichor that smelled of roses and death. At night he heard footsteps behind the metal walls, heavy, slow, deliberate. Sometimes the walls bulged outward, as if something massive was trying to press through. Then came the visions. When he closed his eyes, he saw a garden. Not one made of trees or flowers, but of flesh and decay. The soil was wet with pus, and from it grew stalks crowned with screaming faces. They swayed in an invisible wind, singing hymns of joy, and in the center of it stood a giant figure, bloated, rotting, smiling. Nurgle, the Plague Father. The god's voice was not cruel. It was warm, filled with affection. "Why do you run, child? You prayed for purpose. You begged for peace. I offer both. Eternal, unconditional love. All you must do is let go." When he woke, his face was wet with tears, or perhaps something thicker. He didn't know. He looked down at his hands and saw tiny green veins crawling beneath his skin. He screamed and tore at them, but the flesh healed instantly, knitting itself together with soft, moist sound. He wasn't alone. The others were changing too. The priests now walked barefoot, their flesh merging with the metal floors. Where their feet touched, moss and mushrooms grew. Their eyes glowed faintly yellow. "We are one," they said. "One with him, one with the Emperor. There is no difference. That was when the man broke." He couldn't pray anymore. He couldn't tell which god he was worshipping, the Emperor or Nurgle. Were they even separate? Both promised salvation through suffering. Both demanded faith in the face of death. Both devoured their followers in the end. He tried to escape to the bridge to send a distress signal, but the corridors were no longer straight. The ship had changed shape. Doors led back to where he started, and the air grew thicker with spores. Every surface glistened. He stumbled into what had once been a chapel. Now it was a garden. Bodies hung from the ceiling, blooming like flowers. Their faces were serene, smiling even in death. Their open mouths released golden vapor that smelled of rot and honey. The high priest stood at the altar, his body enormous, his arms stretched wide, his robe fused to the pulsing floor. "My children," the priest said, his voice echoing like a heartbeat, "rejoice. We are becoming eternal. The Emperor's light and Nurgle's gift are one and the same. Decay is not the end, it is his perfection." The man fell to his knees, shaking. "You're insane," he whispered. "We're dying," the priest smiled, revealing teeth made of bone and metal. "Dying?" he said. "No, you are blooming." The floor split open beneath the priest. From the hole rose tendrils of green light, coiling around him, sinking into his flesh. The room shook with the sound of laughter, the same laughter from the warp. Every pilgrim in the chamber began to chant, their voices merging into one living hymn. The chosen man turned to run, but something stopped him. A warmth spread through his body. His vision blurred. He looked down and saw small white flowers blooming from his wounds. They pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. For the first time since his journey began, the whisper in his mind wasn't mocking. It was comforting. He heard Nurgle again, gentle, patient, paternal. "See, it doesn't hurt forever. Pain is only the first step. You will feed the stars, my son. You will grow where others die." He dropped to his knees, sobbing. He didn't know whether to pray or scream. He pressed his hand to the floor, and it was warm, like skin. The ship itself seemed to breathe with him. He could feel the Emperor's name slipping from his mind, replaced by another. Father. The void outside the Sanctitas Vitae shimmered like a dying flame. The warp storms that had once howled around the ship began to fade, replaced by an unnatural calm. The crew took it as a miracle, a sign that the Emperor had heard their prayers. But the chosen man knew better. The silence wasn't peace. It was the pause before something terrible drew breath. He had stopped sleeping. Dreams no longer belonged to him. When he closed his eyes, he saw the garden again, vast and endless, crawling with life that should not exist. He saw his fellow pilgrims dancing in circles of rot, their laughter echoing through the rotting trees. Every dream ended the same way. The figure of Nurgle reaching out to him, whispering words that dripped like honey and acid. "Your Emperor does not hear you," the voice said. "He never has." When he woke, the air around him seemed thicker. The smell of incense was gone, replaced by decay masked with perfume. The ship's lumen lights flickered, dimmed, then brightened again, but their glow was tinged green. The priests said it was holy light. The man knew it was something else, a different kind of divinity. On the fourth day of silence, the ship's astropath screamed. Her psychic wail echoed through every deck, freezing everyone in place. When they found her, she was kneeling before the shrine of the Emperor, her face locked in ecstasy. Her eyes had burst, and her mouth was filled with writhing maggots. Still, she whispered one final message. "He is not watching." The high priest declared it blasphemy. Her body was burned. The ashes were scattered through the ship's air systems, so every breath may carry her devotion. The chosen man watched in silence. He didn't pray anymore. He only listened to the faint creaks of the hull, the heartbeat under the metal floors, and the laughter that sometimes echoed between the bulkheads. He began to write. He didn't know why, but his hands moved on their own. He carved strange symbols into the walls with a piece of broken metal. Spirals, eyes, mouths, shapes that seemed familiar but wrong. He thought they were prayers. Later he realized they were not his words. Each night more pilgrims vanished. The corridors grew darker. The ship's cogitators malfunctioned, displaying scriptures that didn't exist in the Imperial creed. The garden grows in silence. All decay is holy. He who rots endures. The high priest called it revelation. The chosen man called it infection. Then came the call from the bridge. "Pilgrims, rejoice! The Astronomican shines before us." The warp had released them. Terror lay ahead, the cradle of humanity, the seat of the God Emperor himself. The pilgrims cheered, weeping with joy. Some fell to their knees, kissing the decayed floors, thanking the Emperor for delivering them. But when the chosen man looked through a viewport, he saw not stars, but a vast green mist stretching endlessly across the void. The Astronomican's light was there, yes, but faint, distant, and smothered by something pulsing, living, growing. The priesthood ordered hymns of thanksgiving. They didn't notice the spores drifting in the air vents. They didn't hear the wet scraping sounds coming from the chapel walls. When the ship entered real space, the engines screamed like dying beasts. The void shields flickered, not from external fire, but from within. Flesh had grown over the generator conduits. The machine spirits were suffocating under living matter. The tech priests prayed, but their prayers came out as coughs, their lungs already blooming with mold. The chosen man walked among them like a ghost. He felt neither fear nor faith anymore, only understanding. The Emperor was silent because he had no voice left for them. Humanity's faith had become rot long ago. They had simply given it a name, painted it gold, and built cathedrals around it. He made his way to the chapel again. The once shining altar of the Emperor now pulsed like a heart. The golden aquila had melted, its wings drooping like wilted petals. And standing before it was the high priest, his robe soaked in green fluid, his hands trembling with ecstasy. "My son," the priest said, smiling through cracked lips. "We've reached salvation." The man stared, eyes hollow. "This isn't terror," he said. "It is better than terror," the priest replied. "It is his garden. Look." He turned, gesturing to the stained glass windows, but they were no longer glass. They were translucent flesh, showing visions of a world covered in life, endless, festering life. Oceans of filth, skies of spores, continents breathing as one vast organism. The man fell to his knees, overcome with horror and awe. He realized the truth. They weren't approaching terror, they were carrying something to it. The corruption, the spores, the faith twisted into disease. It would all reach holy terror soon. The Emperor wasn't silent. He was dead, or maybe he was listening, and choosing to do nothing. Suddenly the floor beneath him cracked open and a hand, massive, bloated, dripping with decay, rose from the fissure. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But when the man reached out, he felt warmth, tenderness, love. "Do not fear the end," said Nurgle's voice. "The garden welcomes all." The high priest began to sing. His body swelled, bursting open in a spray of pus and light. The spores filled the chamber, spreading through every deck of the ship. The pilgrims screamed, not in pain but in joy. Their voices merged into one, echoing through the void. The chosen man looked toward the viewport one last time. The stars seemed to blur, and he thought he saw the shape of a great eye, not Slanesh's, not Tzeentch's, something older, softer, eternal. Then at last, he prayed, not to the Emperor but to the Father of Plagues. And in that moment, the silence of the Emperor became absolute. The ship Sanctitas Vitae vanished from the Astronomican's light. A month later, fragments of it fell into orbit around Terra, carrying spores that no one recognized until it was too late. The fragments of the Sanctitas Vitae fell through the blackness like dying stars. To the watchful augurs of Terra, they appeared as debris, the remnants of yet another pilgrim ship lost to the warp. Such tragedies were common. The Adeptus Administratum barely logged them anymore, but this debris carried something far worse than death. When the first fragments entered Terra's upper atmosphere, they broke apart in showers of emerald light. The people below thought it was a sign, the Emperor's blessing descending from the heavens. Pilgrims filled the streets, their voices raised in prayer, their eyes turned skyward as glowing dust rained down upon them. It was not dust. It was spore invisible, patient, alive. Within hours, the first changes began. A market in the southern Hab district of the palace walls erupted in chaos when vendors found their wares covered in a thin film of greenish mold. The local enforcers burned it. The next day, the same fungus appeared on their armor, creeping through the seams like veins of disease. By the third day, entire sectors began to smell faintly of sweet rot. People complained of dreams, gardens of flesh, rivers of decay, a laughing voice whispering in the dark. The ecclesiarchy dismissed it as heretical nonsense. A trial of faith, they said. The Emperor tests your devotion, but devotion was exactly what fed it. In the great basilicas of the Imperial cult, priests led mass prayer sessions. Thousands gathered shoulder to shoulder, chanting the litanies of purification. They coughed, sneezed, bled, their sweat pooled together, feeding the unseen spores. Each word of faith carried warmth, and Nurgle's children bloomed in that warmth like flowers in sunlight. The disease didn't kill quickly. It caressed. It nurtured. Those who were infected found themselves filled with strange vitality. Wounds no longer hurt. Hunger faded. Pain turned to pleasure. Some began to glow faintly beneath their skin, their veins pulsing with green light. At first, the ecclesiarchy saw it as a miracle. They called these people the Blessed Decayed. Then their teeth began to fall out. Within a week, Terra's underhives transformed into living warrens. The air was thick, humid, heavy with the scent of fertility and corruption. Walls pulsed like flesh. Pipes bled golden ichor. The administratum sealed the lower sectors, believing it could contain the spread. They were wrong. From the deepest tunnels of the hive to the highest spires of the Imperial palace, the garden of Nurgle reached upward. Every prayer, every desperate plea for salvation was answered, but not by the Emperor, by his opposite. In the golden halls of the Adeptus Custodes, alarm bells rang. Genetic sensors detected foreign biomatter spreading through the atmosphere. The Lord Commander of the Adeptus Custodes himself ordered a lockdown. The skies of Terra turned crimson as orbital defenses targeted anything that moved. But it was too late. The spores had already taken root in the lungs of billions. Even those untouched felt it, a heaviness in the air, a whisper in their minds. The Astronomican's light flickered for a moment, dimmed, then flared again, weaker as though choking on its own brilliance. The Imperial palace became the epicenter of the spreading madness. Priests began to carve strange sigils into their flesh, believing it would protect them. Some swore they could hear the Emperor's voice calling them to embrace the renewal. The High Lords of Terra convened in secret. Their faces were pale, their robes perfumed to mask the stench creeping through the air vents. "This is not a plague," said one. "It is worship." On the streets below, the faithful gathered in vast processions. They carried statues of the Emperor, now half melted from rot. Their hymns had changed subtly, still reverent, still holy, but the words twisted into new meanings. He who dies shall live again. All flesh must bloom. The garden is eternal. From orbit, the planet's surface began to change hue. Forests of spores sprouted where once stood holy temples. Rivers turned sluggish and golden. Even the sacred walls of the Imperial palace sweated with green fluid. The Adeptus Mechanicus fought back. They unleashed purging machines, walking incinerators that bathed the infected zones in fire. For a time it worked. Streets burned, hives collapsed. The sky turned black with ash. But even fire has its limits. In the ashes, new life stirred. Spores drifted upward, glowing like tiny suns. They settled on the shoulders of the pyromantic servitors and began to grow once more. The very air of terror had become a living organism, adapting, learning, loving. And in the heart of it all, deep beneath the throne room, a whisper began to stir within the Emperor's corpse itself. He sat upon the golden throne, motionless for 10,000 years. But now tendrils of green mist coiled around his decayed form, seeping into his armor. The machine spirits screamed in pain, their circuits burning. But the presence would not stop. The chosen man, the pilgrim who had once boarded the Sanctitas Vitae, now stood among the crowd of the blessed, decayed. His skin glistened like polished wax, his eyes glowing faintly. He had returned to terror, though he no longer remembered how. He gazed toward the distant palace and whispered softly, "He will see us now, and perhaps, somewhere in the endless machinery of the throne, something stirred." A twitch of a finger, a flicker in the Astronomican's dying flame. Was it life, or just the final death rattle of divinity? None could tell. Above terror, the void darkened. The warp itself began to twist, coiling around the planet like a serpent of light and decay. From across the galaxy, the followers of Nurgle felt it. A pulse, a heartbeat in the warp. The garden had found its root. It would never stop growing now. The chosen man fell to his knees, tears of pus streaming down his cheeks. "He has spoken," he said, voice trembling with awe. But it wasn't the Emperor who spoke. It was something far older, something that had waited, patient and smiling, for mankind to love it enough to let it in. The hour has come. The air within the sacrificial chamber trembles with psionic pressure, an invisible crushing weight that seems to squeeze the breath from every lung. The air smells of sanctified incense, promethium oil, and the faint tang of blood. The faithful line up, their skin slick with sweat, eyes wide with fear and awe. Above them, golden statues of the Emperor gleam like gods of judgment, their eyes carved to look downward, as if witnessing every trembling soul. The priests of the Adeptus Ministorum chant in low Gothic, their words ancient and thunderous. "By his flame we are purified. By his will we endure." Their voices echo across the marble walls, bouncing and merging into a single, resonant sound, and the sound of death and devotion fused together. You, the chosen sacrifice, kneel before the altar. You feel the gravity of what's about to happen. You are told this was an honor, that to die for the Emperor is the highest form of service a mortal can achieve. But in this moment fear grips you like a vice. Your heart pounds in your ears, drowning out the chanting. The heat from the sacred pyre burns your skin before it even touches you. A servo skull hovers near, scanning your vitals. The priest beside you, draped in crimson and gold, raises a blade engraved with the aquila. His voice booms, "Let this offering sustain his divine light. Let the flesh of the faithful fuel the Astronomican, that the Imperium may see through the void." The crowd erupts into a single unified cry, "For the Emperor!" You look upward one final time and you see it. Above the golden altar, through the smoke and the fire, you glimpse the faint shimmer of a psychic presence, a light that burns and blinds. It's said that in the final instant, the Emperor himself touches the soul of those sacrificed in his name. Whether that's truth or madness, no one knows. But as the priest's blade descends, you feel something pierce deeper than the flesh, a pull, a connection. The moment of death is agony. But beneath that pain, there's something else. A surge of warmth, like being consumed by sunlight. Your vision fractures into endless gold. The body burns, the soul screams, and in the instant of annihilation, you understand. Your consciousness is torn from your body, drawn into the warp like a stream into an endless ocean. Around you, thousands of others scream, cry, and pray as their souls are funneled into one colossal blaze. the Astronomican, the Emperor's light that guides all ships through the madness of the warp. In that brilliance you glimpse what few mortals ever see. The Emperor is not just a man on a throne. He is everywhere. His will stretches across stars. His thoughts echo through time, and now a part of you, your pain, your devotion, your very soul, becomes fuel for his eternal purpose. You are both gone and eternal, forgotten and divine. Back on Terra, the priests record another name in the Book of Sacrifice. The crowd disperses. The smell of burnt flesh fades beneath the incense. The Imperium continues, unknowing, uncaring, billions living, billions dying, all feeding the same unending flame. To be sacrificed to the Emperor is to cease to exist, and yet to exist forever, as one with his light. There is no awakening, no gasp of breath, no heartbeat returning. Only the sudden realization that you exist, but not as you once did. Your body is gone. Your flesh, your bones, your breath, all burned away upon the altar of Terra. You have become something else entirely. You are consciousness. You are thought. You are light. At first it feels like drowning. You tumble through a sea of golden fire, your awareness spinning in every direction. Countless others drift beside you, screaming, whispering, praying. Billions of human souls, all sacrificed, all swallowed by the same endless radiance. You cannot tell where you end and they begin. Their memories flash through your mind. Soldiers dying in trenches, priests weeping on marble floors, children chanting hymns in cathedral cities, all of them, now one with you, the Astronomican. The Emperor's beacon. You feel it before you understand it. The Golden Sea is not chaos. It is order, purpose, divinity forged from agony. You sense an immense gravity at the center, a power beyond comprehension. The Emperor, his mind burns like a sun that never dies. His will stretches across eternity, holding the Astronomican together through sheer impossible thought. You are pulled toward him, screaming without a mouth, praying without words. The closer you get, the more your individuality crumbles. Your name dissolves first, then your memories, then the faint notion that you were ever alive at all, but his voice and not a sound. But a command written into your soul halts your final collapse. Burn, and you shall guide them, and you understand, you see through his eyes. A million ships drifting through the darkness of the warp, their navigators staring into the void, searching for you. Use the light that guides them. Good? The lifeline that keeps humanity from falling into madness. You are one fragment of an infinite star, one thought in the Emperor's mind. Your pain sustains billions, and yet pain remains. Beyond the radiant sea lies the nightmare of the warp. It presses against the Astronomican like a storm against a fragile dome. Shapes crawl within the darkness. Demons with impossible forms, their eyes like black suns, their laughter echoing through eternity. They hunger for the light, drawn to it, gnashing their fangs against its barrier. You feel them. You hear them. They whisper promises, freedom, pleasure, power, but you know their truth. You've seen what the priests called chaos. You've seen what happens to those who listen. So you burn brighter and the light holds. For now, but others do not. You watch as entire clusters of souls, billions of them, flicker and fade, devoured by the warp's predators. The Astronomican shudders, dims for a heartbeat, then strengthens again as new sacrifices arrive from Terra. It is a cycle of eternal consumption. The Emperor endures, but he is weary. You feel it. His strength stretched across millennia, his will fraying at the edges, and still, he does not stop. You see flashes of his ancient past, a tall figure in golden armor walking through the ruins of old Earth, commanding armies, raising banners, uniting mankind. You feel his sorrow, his pride, his burden. Every soul he consumes adds to his torment, yet he endures for the species he refuses to abandon. You are a part of that burden now. Time loses all meaning. You do not know if you have existed for seconds or centuries. Around you, the golden sea pulses with endless hymns, voices of the damned and the faithful, merging into one eternal chant. There is no silence, no rest. Every moment your essence vibrates with the Emperor's command. Guide them. Endure. The thought occurs. If this is eternity, what comes after? Is there release? Salvation? Or will you burn forever, until even your soul is ashes in the warp? But even that question fades, as you merge deeper into the light. You feel the Emperor's warmth enfold you, like the embrace of a dying sun. His presence is unbearable, divine, and infinite. You no longer resist it. You surrender, utterly and willingly. And in that surrender you find peace. You see again through his perception the vastness of the Imperium, its worlds lit by faith and fire. Armies march beneath banners bearing his sigil. Cathedrals rise higher than mountains. Millions cry his name as they fight and die. They do not know you exist, yet every one of them lives because you and countless others burn for them. You are forgotten, but you are eternal. That is the paradox of sacrifice in the Imperium. To be remembered is to be mortal. To be forgotten is to serve forever. As your consciousness fades further into the Emperor's will, you realize something else. The warp itself recoils from the Astronomican's light. Every pulse of radiance reshapes reality, keeping humanity's path open through the madness. The beacon is not merely a guide. It is a weapon, a holy wound carved into the heart of the Imperium, and you are one of its blades. For one fleeting instant, before you vanish completely, you think you hear the Emperor speak again, not as command, but as gratitude. You have done well, my child. Then all that remains is light. Endless burning light. The warp howls, the Imperium endures. The Astronomican burns, and you, a single soul among billions, shine forever within it. There are no boundaries within the Astronomican, only waves of golden fire and ceaseless prayer. Yet somewhere within that vast psychic ocean, a small spark refuses to surrender. That spark is you. You were supposed to fade, to dissolve completely into the Emperor's divine radiance. That is the fate of every soul offered to him, to burn and become part of his eternal light. But something within you remains anchored. A memory, a question, a flicker of self that refuses to die. At first it is a whisper. Why me? Echoing faintly against the endless hymns. The thought should not exist here. Individuality is forbidden. Yet somehow it persists. The Emperor's will engulfs you like a sun, but even suns have shadows. And within that shadow you awaken. You begin to drift, pulled not by gravity but by curiosity. Around you, billions of souls continue their song, unaware that one among them has broken from harmony. You are the lone note in a perfect symphony, dissonant, defiant. The light grows dimmer as you drift, not because the Emperor's presence weakens, but because you are moving away, away from salvation, away from unity, towards something else. The warp presses closer, its colors bleeding through the cracks in the golden veil. Violet storms twist in the distance. Silhouettes of horrors move within them, demons malformed and eager. The closer you drift to the edges, the louder their voices become. At first they mock you, then they tempt you. I were not like them, a voice whispers from beyond the light. You remember. It is beautiful, terrible, and intimate, a voice that speaks your name, the one you thought you had forgotten. It slithers into your thoughts, wrapping them like chains of silk. You have tasted eternity. Why crawl when you could rule? You feel the warp's breath on your essence, cold, sweet, poisonous. You know the priests would call this heresy, corruption, damnation. But here, beyond the reach of the living, those words lose meaning. All that remains is choice and curiosity. You glimpse shapes in the storm, impossible beings of flesh and nightmare, a towering figure of plague and rot, laughing softly as it births disease upon the stars. A queen of endless beauty whose gaze can unmake reality. A storm of rage, a whisper of deceit. The four they are watching. Your essence trembles as one of them moves closer. The golden light flickers. The Astronomican pulses in warning. The Emperor's mind lashes outward, a silent command for you to return. But it's too late. You have seen the other side. You understand now what the ecclesiarchy never dared to speak, that the Emperor's light does not destroy chaos. It holds it back. Barely. Every second, every pulse of the Astronomican is a battle of wills. His mind is a wall against a flood that never ends, and cracks are beginning to show. You feel one beneath you, a fissure in the psychic barrier. Energy bleeds through it like molten gold leaking into the dark. You hover above it, trembling, torn between two infinities, the divine radiance that demands your obedience, and the abyss that whispers freedom. The warp shivers. Something vast and ancient senses you, a consciousness older than stars. It does not belong to one god, but to the warp itself, a primal awareness that existed before mortals named their fears. It sees you, insignificant yet defiant, and it laughs. You cannot escape, it says. Even your emperor serves me, though he denies it. The truth, or a lie, burns through your soul. You scream, though you have no mouth, and the golden light around you surges in response. The emperor's will slams into you like a tidal wave. His voice thunders through your being, return. For the first time you feel his anger, not hatred but divine fury. You are disobedience incarnate, a flaw within his perfect order. His light pulls at you, demanding submission. But the warp pulls harder. The two forces collide through you. The golden radiance tears at your soul. The warp floods into your mind, filling it with visions, cities made of bone, stars weeping blood, titans screaming hymns of madness. You see the galaxy as it truly is, a wound carved into the flesh of reality, and in that chaos you glimpse the Emperor himself, not as a god on a throne, but as a man chained to his own creation. The Golden Throne is not his seat. It is his prison. The Astronomican burns not by choice, but by necessity. You see his agony, eternal, unending. You see his faith, absolute, indomitable, and you understand why he sacrifices billions. He cannot stop. If he rests even for a heartbeat, the light will die, and mankind will be consumed. And in that moment of clarity, you weep, because you realize the truth. You are not defying him. You are sharing his torment. The warp roars around you, furious at your understanding. Demons screech, the storm writhes, and the golden light swells once more. The Emperor's power envelops you, not to destroy, but to protect. You are mine, he says, and his voice is both terrifying and tender. Your essence trembles as you are pulled back into the light. The warp claws at you, dragging you down, but the Emperor's radiance cuts through it like a sword. You feel yourself breaking apart again, fragment by fragment, dissolving into the golden sea, but this time something stays with you. Not individuality, not rebellion, but memory, a faint awareness of what lies beyond. A scar within the Astronomican's perfection, and deep within that scar a whisper lingers, not yours, not his, but something else entirely. One day even the light will fade, then silence. You are one again with the golden sea, your defiance burned away, but your mark remains. Somewhere, in the eternal storm of souls that fuel the Emperor's beacon, a tiny fracture glows faintly, waiting for a day when the light flickers just a little too long. The warp remembers, and it is patient. The moment I was lifted from the altar, my body no longer belonged to me. The priest's hands were cold and mechanical, their servos whirring as they guided my limp form toward the radiant column of light descending from above. The air trembled with divine force. Every breath felt heavy with golden pain. I realized I was standing at the threshold of the Emperor's true presence, a place no mortal was meant to endure. The golden light intensified until the edges of the world burned away. My vision dissolved into pure brilliance, and within that radiance I felt the weight of billions of souls screaming in harmony, not in agony but in worship. They were part of something vast, endless, and absolute. I could sense the Astronomican, that psychic beacon stretching across the galaxy, pulsing with the heartbeat of the God Emperor himself. My body began to disintegrate, atom by atom, as though my flesh was a fragile offering before a sun. Pain flooded every nerve, but beneath it was something transcendent, a strange serenity as though the agony was being rewritten into purpose. I was becoming part of something eternal. Suddenly I was no longer in the great hall of terror. My mind expanded across infinite distances. I saw the warp as a vast, storming ocean of madness, red, violet, green, filled with entities that screamed and clawed, forever trying to breach reality. And at the center of this chaotic sea, a single golden light held them back. That light was him, and now a fragment of me was being drawn into it. Voices echoed through me, billions upon billions, the souls of the sacrificed, each burning for eternity within the Emperor's will. They whispered prayers older than any tongue I had known. We are the fuel of the beacon. We are the unending devotion. We are his flame. I understood then the truth of the sacrifice. It was not an end. It was a transfiguration. The Emperor did not consume us out of cruelty. He needed us to sustain his existence, to keep the Imperium alive against the warp's endless hunger. Each sacrifice was a thread in the tapestry of his divine strength. In that realization, my fear dissolved. The pain, the terror, the endless dread of death, it all became irrelevant. I was becoming light. I felt memories unravel, my name, my world, my face, all fading like mist before dawn. Only one thought remained: service. Through my vanishing consciousness, I glimpsed scenes beyond human comprehension. Fleets of the Imperium sailing across the stars, guided by the beacon of my burning soul. Entire worlds praying beneath golden cathedrals. Millions dying in his name, believing, fighting, existing, because I burned for them, and yet, even within that divine unity, I could feel a shadow. The Emperor's presence was not simply light, it was also boundless sorrow. Behind his godlike radiance, I felt the echo of a man who once walked among humanity, who once spoke and dreamed of peace. Now trapped upon the golden throne, he suffered an eternity of undeath, sustained only by the ceaseless offering of lives. For the briefest moment, I sensed his thoughts, vast, incomprehensible, but tinged with regret. "Forgive me, my children. This is the only way." That whisper tore through the warp like a cosmic lament. It shattered my final resistance. My soul burned completely, consumed in golden fire, but not in despair. I had become part of his lament, his burden, his light. From far away, perhaps from the world of the living, I heard the priests chanting again. Another sacrifice was being prepared. The endless cycle continued. Thousands each day, millions each year. Each one stepping forward blind to the truth, believing it an honor, and perhaps in a way it was. For without our sacrifice, the Emperor's light would fade. The Astronomican would die. The Imperium would fall into darkness, swallowed by the warp. Humanity would be no more. My existence was gone, but my essence burned within that endless flame. The Emperor's radiance pulsed through me. I was both nothing and everything. I was his voice, his will, his eternal beacon. "Let there be light," he whispered across eternity, and through me, there was. The universe continued to spin. The endless war raged on, and the Emperor remained, silent, immovable, sustained by our eternal offering. But deep within that blinding brilliance where mortal eyes could never reach, the souls of the sacrificed whispered a single truth: he weeps, and in that single tear of light, galaxies were born and died. The golden light faded into silence. My essence drifted in the void, neither alive nor dead. The echo of the Emperor's presence still burned within me, but now there was only quiet, the kind that exists between stars. I was no longer a person, no longer a thought. I was a spark within the machine of eternity, and yet even in that nothingness, I felt the beating heart of terror, the ceaseless hum of machines, the chanting of priests, the low rumble of the golden throne consuming life after life. Every breath, every prayer, every death was part of an endless rhythm. The Imperium lived, and we, the sacrificed, were the pulse that kept it alive. From my disembodied perspective, I could see the universe as he did, an empire stretching across 1,000,000 worlds, yet teetering always on the brink of collapse. Endless wars consumed countless lives. Demons tore through the veil of reality. Whole civilizations burned in his name, believing salvation waited at the feet of his throne. And every single day, 10,000 souls, like I once was, were offered to him. 10,000 more sparks added to the pyre that lit the Astronomican, the psychic lighthouse guiding the ships of mankind through the roiling madness of the warp. This was the truth the Imperium could never speak aloud. The Emperor was not just a god to be worshipped. He was a machine of sacrifice, a divine engine fueled by human souls. As I drifted through the collective consciousness of the sacrificed, I could sense them all. Millions of voices layered upon one another, murmuring prayers that no longer had meaning. Some screamed, some wept, others simply existed, quiet, numb, hollow. Yet all were bound in devotion, and above it all the Emperor's mind towered, infinite, fractured, ancient. He was everywhere, in every soul, in every dying breath. His will flowed through the galaxy like a current of golden fire, shaping destinies and silencing doubts. Even now, as his mortal body withered upon the throne, his spirit burned brighter than any star. But within that brilliance, I could feel his torment. He remembered. He remembered the age before worship, when he walked among men as one of them, when he led armies not in divine wrath, but in the name of reason, unity, and progress, when he believed humanity could rise above superstition. Now his empire was built entirely upon it. They have forgotten what I was, his thought whispered through the flame. They see only what they need me to be. It was a confession, not of failure, but of inevitability. Humanity had turned their savior into a god, and in doing so had imprisoned him within their faith. The golden throne, the sacrifice, the endless worship, all necessary to keep the light burning, but also chains that bound him for eternity. And the sacrificed, were both the links and the fire that forged them. I began to see the pattern now, the endless loop of life, death, and devotion. The Imperium was a machine that devoured itself to survive. Each world sent its children to die in wars that would never end. Each believer prayed to a God who could no longer hear them. And each day we, the chosen, fed the dying light that allowed humanity to stagger forward through the dark. It was both beautiful and horrifying. I felt the echo of the next sacrifice, another pilgrim, trembling before the priests, their mind filled with terror and hope, just as mine once was. They believed their death would bring honor, that they would become part of something divine. And in a way they were right. As their soul ignited, I felt it join the chorus, another voice in the ocean of fire. The cycle turned once more. Life, worship, sacrifice, death, light, repeat. The galaxy spun onward, uncaring. Fleets sailed, wars burned, billions suffered and believed. And we, the eternal chorus, kept the beacon alive. Somewhere within the golden flame I sensed a question rising, small, fragile but defiant. Will it ever end? The voice was new, the soul of a recent sacrifice. I reached out to it, not with words but with the calm acceptance of one who has already burned away. No, I whispered into the fire. Not until the stars die. The light flickered, and the new soul wept. But then, like all of us, it began to fade, merging into the unity of the Emperor's will. For a brief moment, I thought I felt him stir as though he had heard. A ripple passed through the Astronomican, and all across the galaxy, those attuned to its psychic hum felt it too. A subtle shift, a moment of awareness. Perhaps he remembered us, not as fuel but as his children. But then the light steadied. The rhythm resumed. The machine continued. 10,000 tomorrow, 10,000 the day after, and forevermore. I realized then that immortality was not a gift. It was an obligation. The Emperor would never die, not as long as humanity fed him their devotion, their bodies, their souls, their faith. And we, the sacrificed, would never rest. We would burn eternally, a billion flames sustaining a single light. Yet even in that endless cycle there was a strange, tragic beauty. We had become part of something greater than life, a symbol of humanity's refusal to surrender, even in the face of despair. The Imperium endured because we endured. The Emperor lived because we died. The light shone because we burned. And so, as I dissolved completely into the golden sea, I offered one final thought, a whisper carried through eternity. May our fire never fade. The universe turned. The chants continued, the sacrifices burned, and the Emperor, silent and sorrowful upon his throne, wept golden tears that none would ever see. The cycle was complete. The cycle was eternal. The Emperor endures,